All right. How many of us have been in the industry for more than 20 years? Gosh, I feel old. The industry has changed a lot. One of my pet peeves is we keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting different outcomes. So you're going to see me get a lot on my soapbox. So just a quick disclaimer, all the things I'm going to talk about are based on my opinion and opinion only. I cannot be held responsible for any curse words that comes out of my mouth. This is actually being recorded, so I probably shouldn't. So there are two people that don't know I curse, my wife and my pastor. So, so if this is going to be recorded, I probably need to be careful because you just never know where the video is going to go. But on a more serious note, been in the industry a while, and attribution is a topic that I've always struggled with. I used to run honeypots way back when. I had a lot more hair then, I assure you. Back in the 90s, I actually founded the UK Honeynet project. So if you go to honeynet.org.uk, I registered the domain. Yeah, I'm guilty. And we had two honeypots going on. Ours was kind of the unofficial one. And then we had I think it was called ukhoneynet.org.uk. That was going on, and so when I moved to the States, been in Atlanta now 18 years, they reached out to me and said, could we have your domain? Since you're no longer in the UK. I'm like, sure, as long as you could list me as the founder of the Honeynet project. So I didn't sell it to them for $10,000, but I got bragging rights from them. And it was based on a handshake. We didn't need a 100-page contract. Until today, they still list me as the founder, which I found very, very interesting. That doesn't happen very often in the States. All right, so attribution is a topic very near and dear to my heart. I've dealt with this my entire career in 23 years, so much so that I decided to write a book on it, a fictional novella, which I'm going to talk about towards the end. So, you remember, who recognizes this guy, this famous guy? Willie Sutton. Can somebody enlighten us on who Willie is? Please.
Willie Sutton's a bank robber, and so the story goes, it's debatable, he asked him why he robbed banks. And that's why.
And that was so profound. They were probably expecting him to say, well, I had a bad childhood, dad left, and I wasn't coddled as a baby, and he said, that's where the money is. So why do people hack stuff? That's where the data is, right? So I like to use that as an example. Like every time people ask me, especially in my CISO roles, like, why are we being attacked? I'm like, because we can get attacked. Like, I call it the wild, wild web, where just by being on the wild, wild web, you get attacked, right? And sometimes it's more intentional. So I also like to share this video, which kind of takes me back to the 80s. It's coming. Wait for it. No dancing, dog. So thanks to Doug, I'm actually on the stage. So shout out to Doug as well as Richard and Harald. So if I screw up, oh, sorry, is that a crossword? You could blame it on them. So on a more serious note, let's talk about attribution. So attribution, I'm not an expert, I'm not a psychologist, but I apply a lot of common sense, and I know how to use Google, and I love Wikipedia. So a lot of this stuff I found on Wikipedia. What is attribution? There are two types of attribution. There's external attribution, which a lot of us tend to focus on, and there's internal attribution. I've had, so many times in my career, I've had to do a lot of soul searching and say, why are people doing stuff? Outsiders, right? Folks I don't know, folks I know. But then I have to self-reflect and say, what did I do wrong, right? as an industry, I want to challenge us to start thinking along those lines. And I'm going to shed a little bit more light on that. There are different types of theories and models around attribution. There's common sense psychology, which I love. There's corresponding inference. I don't know what that means, to be honest, but I had to include that in there because it was on Wikipedia. And then all these different things. And I'm sure there are people who specialize in this stuff. So much so that I'm actually considering doing a PhD on attribution. And for me, that's like something I never imagined I would do. You know, I have both my parents are retired professors. You know, I have 3 sisters, a twin sister and 2 younger sisters. My 2 younger sisters live in Atlanta as well. They're straight A students. If I had a C when I was in school, that's a good day. Like, I just barely made it through school. Somehow I have a master's degree and I don't even know how I survived that, to be honest. But I didn't like the classroom. I didn't like academia. I loved my family to bits, but I'm like, when I grow up, I don't want to be like them. Fast forward, you know, a couple of decades later, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be cool to do a PhD? And the title would be, or the topic would be attribution, because I'm so passionate about it now. So there's also bias and errors related to attribution. I think one thing that has been really, really refreshing for me to see this week is there's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion. You got to remember, I've been in the industry a while, and I remember going for a conference in, I think it was at Foxwoods in Connecticut back in the 90s. And I showed up, and there were the 2 guys at the door, and one of them said, "Oh, you're here for the other conference." And like, no, I'm here for this conference. But it was so obvious that they just saw me as, he just doesn't fit kind of the security guy, you know, image in their mind. There was also a conference I showed up at, and somebody said, "Oh, when's lunch going to be served?" And so I walked away from it. I said, "Hang on, I'll find out." So I go ask the waiter. I said, "When is lunch going to be served?" And then the waiter told me what time. So I went back to him and I said, "Sir, lunch is going to be served at 1. Maybe it was 12, but I'm just, you know, I gave him the exact time. And I actually did the keynote during lunch. So I'm looking at the guy in the audience and I'm seeing like his jaws drop, like almost like, and I saw the guilty feeling as well, like, oh, I screwed up. 3 curse words so far, right? 3 or 4. Okay, I need to stop. All right, so bias and errors also contributes to problems with attribution, right? We've seen that play out in the legal system. We've seen that not only in the US, globally. It's a challenge when you already have your own bias. You tend to want to jump to the same conclusion that you already have in your mind, right? So having an open mind definitely helps. Let's just see how technical I am and move between PowerPoint slides. All right, has anyone seen this from Penniman Institute? 11 billion records. How many people do we have on the face of the planet? 5 billion, 6 billion? 7? Okay, and counting. And we've lost 11 billion records as an industry. So that means our records have been compromised several times. Like, our records are in high demand. That's actually a bad thing. But does that mean they're actually worthless now? Or does that mean they're worth more on the dark web? Healthcare data tends to be worth a lot more because you cannot change your health records, right? You could cancel your credit card, you could put a freeze on your credit file, but healthcare data seems to be command a premium on the dark web. And this is just based on 20 years back when I ran Honeynet. And you're starting to see a trend where it's now in the billions, right? 4 billion records in 2016. And over a billion, actually 2016 to 2018 was broke the record for previous years. Privacy rights actually stopped, for some reason they stopped publishing the data. Like if you go to their website, you can only download data up to November 20th. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but maybe they just got fed up. They're like, okay, we're just going to stop tracking this stuff. But that's really, really worrying. That's really, really worrying. I mean, that's the state of our industry. Majority of these data breaches were caused by weaknesses in people, process, and not so much about the technology. I love technology. I'm a techie at heart, but we have to think differently about cybersecurity. So I want to share my story in the past 5 years. You know, like I said, attribution has been a top of my mind, or top of mind for me for 20 years, over 20 years, but I want to share my story in the past 5 years. 5 years ago, I was hired, not appointed. There's a difference between being appointed and being hired. Like my former boss, who was the CIO for the city of Atlanta, he was appointed by the mayor at the time, the former mayor. I was actually hired by the CIO. So I went through, you know, an application process. People thought I was crazy. Like, why would you go work for a city? I went through interviews. I went through background checks. And finally, I landed the job as Atlanta's first CISO. For those who might not know, Atlanta is one of the most critical cities in the US. 70% of our payment processing goes through Atlanta. It's known as the transaction alley for the world, not just the US. Medical prescriptions, there's a company that starts with M and ends with N. I don't like shaming companies or naming them, but starts with M, ends with N, that processes maybe 80% of our pharmaceutical prescriptions, and the data center is right off of I-85 in Atlanta. Did anyone hear about the I-85 bridge collapse a couple of years back? That was pretty serious. The fire was started by a homeless guy who actually didn't end up going to jail, apparently. So he said he had like a trolley and just set it on fire with cardboard boxes. That spread into some warehouse that had PVC pipes. Within a couple of hours, the bridge collapsed. I-85 is like the bridge between, or the interstate between the South and the North. So I think the federal government advanced something like $50 million within the first week because it's part of critical infrastructure. So I actually have friends that were responsible for managing that incident from the time the fire department put out the fire. I mean, everything worked like clockwork, you know, almost like a perfect case study of how emergency response should be done. That all happened in Atlanta. We had the Super Bowl, last Super Bowl in Atlanta. Atlanta also happens to host the world's busiest airport. So Hartsfield International Airport is the world's busiest airport. So I signed up as CISO for a city, and I'm like, I just want a comfortable job. I want to show up 9 to 5, you know, and get paid every 2 weeks and stop worrying about payroll and getting funding as an entrepreneur. So I get this job, and I was actually working 8 to 8, not 9 to 5, sometimes 7 to 8. And within 6 months, we were applying for the Rockefeller grant for 100 resilient cities. The city had applied twice. And while I was there, we applied the third time. I provided some input. I'm not a grant writer. I actually hate writing, right? But I wrote a book. I had a ghostwriter. And so we were one of the 100 resilient cities. And one of the things that I made sure we identified was a cyber attack. Now, you got to remember, this is a city that has never had a major cyber attack. And you have this crazy guy with a funny accent saying, hey, we're going to get attacked. People are like, this guy is going around scaring everybody, like the sky is falling. You know, I was like the boogeyman. Even the police were afraid of me. Like, can you imagine the police being afraid of you? Because I know what sites they go to. But, it's been recorded, sorry. I'm sure that never happens in any city. You know, I kid you not, I presented to the mayor and his cabinet, and the first cabinet member to invite me and my team over was the chief of police. He's now retired. So after we met with him and presented to him and his commanders, he goes, "Oh, it's raining. We can give you an escort back to City Hall." And I'm sitting at the back. And I'm like, I'm sitting at the back of a police, like the optics was just scary. You know, it was a friendly officer, but like, and I'm not going to jail. That's like a dream job. But anyway, that was just one of the highlights from the job. But we identified a cyber attack as one of the things that could potentially cripple Atlanta. This happened in 2015, like mid-2015. The other thing we identified is that a lot of companies have been hacked. Target's been hacked. Home Depot is actually headquartered in Atlanta. This is all public knowledge. Gmail, I think Equifax was added to that list at some point. Yeah, Equifax is based in Atlanta. So we were seeing a lot of organizations in Atlanta getting hacked, and I'm like, it's just a matter of time before we get hacked. Like, and I knew where all our skeletons were. Within my first 100 days, I knew everything. I knew if somebody calls me at 2 a.m. and says we've been hacked, I knew where we could get hacked. So how do you know this? I can still sleep at night. Like, I shouldn't sleep, right? Knowing fully well that it's a race against time. Well, I have a wife that keeps me balanced. She's like, "Ty, the sky isn't falling. These folks, you know, don't kill yourself. You know, if you kill yourself, they're going to move on. They're going to replace you. This is not the end of the world. Just do what you need to do and make sure that you don't get in trouble or you don't become the fall guy." Okay. So what I had to do was to show that worst case scenario. I think it was Ava that said her father advised her that if you want to be an expert, you have to always think worst case scenario. I love America. That works really well. Like if you do that in England, they'll be like, "Yeah, we know that. That's expected." But here, people will be like, "Wow, really? That can happen?" Of course it can happen. So I used that to my advantage. I said, the worst case scenario is we're going to lose $100 million. So this is kind of like a social engineering thing because the current mayor, apparently when he joined the city of Atlanta, he won the election, you know, blah, blah, blah. They wanted him to sign a contract to get a loan for payroll. That was his first contract. The city was almost bankrupt. So his claim to fame is he took the city from bankruptcy to $120 million reserve. We still have a lot of potholes. Like, if they can put that money in potholes, you know, it'll probably deplete the reserve, but, you know, he built the reserve. So I'm presenting to him and his cabinet within my first 100 days what I had done, and I said, "Would you like to write a $100 million check?" And his response was, "Hell no." So I knew I got his attention. So the mayor basically said, "Tell me what you need, write me a memo, let me know what you need." And of course, the first thing I asked for is I need budget, I need money, you know. Yeah. Everybody was like, "Ty, you're always shaking everybody down for money." Yeah, it's not going to mine. It's for the people to protect their data. You're always asking for money. You're always hustling people for money. Like, yeah, my program needs money. So anyway, I asked for budget. I asked for authority. I actually asked for a video from the mayor showing how important cybersecurity was. I also asked for the inevitable, which is information security needs to be outside of IT. Did that ever happen? No. No, that didn't happen. My boss was like, "Nope, you're not leaving my department. You're staying here." I'm like, "Yes, sir." What you don't want to do is ruffle too many feathers, and you definitely don't want to ruffle your boss's feather. So I decided I was going to just stay, and I said, let's revisit it in a year's time, and we'll see where we were at. Of course, in a year's time, I knew I was leaving. I wasn't planning on being there for more than a year, but I'll tell you what happened after that. So $100 million loss, and I mapped, Mayor had 5 priorities at the time, and I mapped how a breach could impact 4 of the priorities. So I'll pick on public safety. So the mayor was very big on public safety, like, hey, you know, we need safer streets. You know, he actually doubled the police force. You know, he increased salaries for the police. I couldn't believe how bad the pay was for the officers. Like the average pay, I mean, I know this is not California money, this is Georgia money. I mean, we guys live, I mean, you could live on a tenth of what you guys live on in Georgia. You have to live in the sticks though, you know, and then they have a name for those people, which most of you probably don't want to be called. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So I said public safety is important. We have streets on, you know, every street. Let's even say we have 2 cops on every street. If folks, you know, we have 500,000 residents. That's how I came up with $100 million loss. And I got that vetted by our enterprise risk management team, which is part of finance. So $200 per record based on Podemon Institute. Do the math, that's $100 million. That was worst case. And I said, let's say that data gets compromised. 500,000 residents. We also have 6 million residents in Metro Atlanta. But I said, let's just say there's 500,000 who actually live in Atlanta zip code, not the suburbs or Metro Atlanta. I said, if their data gets compromised and they become victims of identity theft, they're not going to feel safe anywhere. You could have 2 cops on every street, but it's still going to impact public safety. If they're worried about cleaning up their identity, you know, after identity theft, that's going to be a problem, and that would impact you as a mayor. So the other thing I saw within my first 100 days, so think back to why I got the job. You know, I wanted an easy job. Actually, I did want an easy job, but I also wanted to give back to Atlanta because I love Atlanta. It's my adopted city, been there as of that time, 13 years. So I started using our tools. We have several tools that they had invested in, even though we didn't have a formal program. And we were seeing a lot of attacks. So I started on a Monday. I know that's a bit of an eye chart, but on Wednesday, we got DDoSed. So think about attribution. So this is a guy who used to run honeypots. Some of the data we had was probably used by law enforcement. We didn't give it to them, but it was open source and may have put some people in jail on the other side of the pond. So I'm thinking, who could have hacked, you know, who could have done this just to make me look bad? Because it was already up on my LinkedIn profile that I was the CISO for Atlanta. Bad move with hindsight. So I'm looking through my LinkedIn and I just thought Google is a great intelligence tool, by the way. The Homeland Security uses it, I found out, by the way, because they Googled my company name, because they decided I went on the trip to Amsterdam. It's not what you're thinking, please. I'm just not that kind of person, but it was a business trip. Just to clarify, yeah. Actually, Ralph took me, my friend Ralph Johnson, who's LA County CISO, tricked me to go to the red light district, but that's a different story. Just to see, I'm like, what's the point? He goes, you're in Amsterdam, you know, you have to see the red light district. He goes, I want to have a smoke, let's walk. And then we end up in the red light district. I'm like, Ralph, I don't want to be here. He goes, yeah, that's why I brought you here, like just to see it. Okay, Amsterdam. So coming back from Amsterdam, we went to sponsor the CSA Congress in Amsterdam. And on a buddy pass, which Ralph had, he had somebody who worked for Delta, a friend. And I'm sitting at the, waiting to get checked in, and somebody approaches me and says, starts asking me questions like I was being interrogated, and like, who are you? Homeland Security. Okay, yeah, fine. What do you do? Cybersecurity. He's like, what's that? I'm like, cyber and security? Apparently that was being rude. So I arrived in Atlanta. Usually I get like, welcome back, Mr. Lambo. And the guy go, oh, you need to go for secondary inspection. First time and last time, hopefully last time in my life. So they put us in this room. You're not allowed to get out. And it was a 3-hour wait. So eventually they put me in front of a DHS, I guess TSA, well, maybe DHS. agent. He didn't introduce himself, but it's like, oh, ask me the same questions the guy asked me in Amsterdam. Exactly the same questions, but this time around, I didn't say cyber and security. I said information security, computer security. So I broke it down. And so he goes, oh, who do you work for? I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur. I have several companies. So he Googled my company names. So I got an alert because I was using a tool to track my leads. So that's why I said Google is the best intelligence tool in the world, and it's free most times. So anyway, I Googled during the DDoS attack, I Googled Atlanta hack. And I came up with a pastebin site where there were 50 websites, .gov sites, that were going to be DDoSed. And Atlanta was like number 10. So once they brought us down, they moved on to the next .gov site. So I went straight to my boss. Actually, I asked a few questions from I had one direct report. There's a security engineer. I said, do we have DDoS protection? And I saw the look like, what's Taiye asking about here? And he goes, nope. And when somebody says that, you know, it's kind of it's a loaded response. Like they're really trying to tell you, hey, you don't know what crap you signed up for. So I'm like, tell me the real story. What happened? He goes, well, I've been trying to get them to sign this $16,000 or $20,000 contract to do AT&T, DDoS, because AT&T provided the main pipe. I'm like, we don't have that. So I went straight to my boss and I printed out the pastebin, manifesto, that screenshot, and I said, I Googled Atlanta hack and I came across the fact that we've been DDoSed and they're probably going to come back again, or they're going to attract other people that want to hack for fame or bring us down for fame. So I said, all I know is I don't need to be in this job. Like if a city is so broke that you can't afford this, then you don't really need to be paying my salary. Basically what I was trying to say is I quit if you're not going to sign it. But I had to find diplomatic ways to say it. He signed it. That happened on my day 3. So the other thing I was able to do is and you're probably thinking, what does all this have to do with attribution? Remember, there are 2 types of attribution. There's external and there's internal. So reflecting, like what could I have done better? What could I have done different? The other thing I did within my first 100 days is I did an assessment. So I actually built the first security rating service in the industry. Before, some of the names you're familiar with, like BitSight, Security Scorecard, FICO even owns a company. So I built one focused on cloud, but you could also use it to do an assessment for the enterprise. So as a CISO, I always use it in everywhere I go for free because I'm working for those folks. So initially, this was our score, our security rating score. It was very low. So I knew it was just a matter of time before things go wrong. And that was for me, that was the sense of urgency. Like, I always went around saying, it's a miracle we haven't been hacked. Like, if I was a bad actor, I can hack us in like 5 minutes. Like, and I'm not even that, I'm like 20 years rusty on this stuff. We still had systems using default passwords. Smart city, we had routers online that were using default passwords. I ran a scan against, for the first time in the city's history, we had our first vulnerability management program under my watch. And people were coming to me and say, Ty, why are you scanning my system? And I'm like, I'm trying to help you protect your system. They're like, yeah, but you're giving me more work. They're like, why don't you patch the system? Like, if you've patched it, then you don't have to worry about me scanning and the report showing up on the CIO's inbox, right? And the CTO copied. But I don't want to patch it because it's going to break stuff. Okay. So I then have to call them into my office and say, hey, I get what you're saying. You don't want to do more work. You don't want to take a risk. But you realize that Joe Hacker is not going to call me and say, hey, Ty, just a heads up, I'm going to hack that box. You might want to shut it down or you might want to patch it. They're going to do it irrespective and they're going to be merciless. Like I literally had those types of conversations with some of our IT folks. And it was frustrating, to say the least. There was just a culture of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The other challenge you find with city government and other types of municipalities is every dollar you invest in cybersecurity is at the expense of a pothole. Do you guys have a lot of potholes? For those who live in Southern California, we have a lot in Atlanta. Like literally when my boss talked about potholes in a meeting, that all these potholes we need to fix, I started seeing potholes everywhere. Like I never even saw them. Now I see potholes everywhere I go in Atlanta. And I always thought about, okay, the taxpayer, this is the stuff they see. They want the pothole fixed. They don't want taxes increased. You're trying to invest in something they don't see. Unless something goes wrong, horribly wrong. And then now they're like, oh, why didn't you invest that money? So that's where we're at. The other thing I did is I used a tool by Symantec. I'm not trying to sell any particular products or pitch any product, but you could actually go online. It's called the Data Breach Risk Calculator. And you could calculate, based on different answers you provide, what a breach is going to look like in terms of the financial cost. And it's going to tell you your likelihood. I really don't like that because likelihood is like, yeah, 10% likelihood we're going to get breached. Okay, when? I don't know. Okay, so what? Yeah, what does that tell us? 6 months, 1 year? But it at least gives you something to start with. So I left the city of Atlanta July 1, 2016, and the inevitable happened. You probably all heard it in the news. Atlanta was under a major ransomware attack. The current mayor was 1 month in the job. My former boss had just left a month before to go work for New York City, de Blasio, Mayor de Blasio. He was appointed by Mayor de Blasio. Lucky bugger, sorry. He was really lucky. The current mayor, obviously nobody briefed her that cybersecurity was important. You know why? Because this paranoid, crazy security guy with a funny accent is gone. So everybody was like, yeah, let's get back to normal, right? So nobody told her cybersecurity was important. And she was like, she literally said it, like this wasn't a priority in front of the news. Like this wasn't a priority, now it is. So it was a ransomware attack. I think they detected it very early as of the morning. So part of my program, our incident response plan was we don't pay ransom. We escalate that to the mayor's office, legal communications. They get in front of the cameras. We don't pay the ransom. And they followed that incident response plan to the letter. So I'm really, really proud of them for doing that. I was long gone. My phone was buzzing. At that time, I had joined the Atlanta Federal Reserve, helping their CISO to mature his program. And everybody just kept coming to me. I'm like, I don't know anything. I left almost 2 years ago. I mean, anything I say, I'll be speculating. Just Google it. Use the best intelligence tool, right? And that's what I did as well. I Googled it. Nobody talked to me. None of my former colleagues reached out to me. I reached out to one or two and said, if you need my help personally, I'm here to help and advise and guide, but I'm going to stay away. So it cost the city $17 million instead of paying a $51,000 ransom. So think about that. There's a price to pay for doing the right thing. Some people might argue they did the wrong thing, but they refused to pay. So the saving grace is that the city had cyber insurance. It was one of the things I really, really pushed hard for. I was actually hoping, so this is what we did. So I had a strategic plan that shows where all our gaps are, shows where our maturity is, what you saw earlier on. So we had our insurance broker, Wells Fargo, actually did like a dog and pony show. That's what I call it. So they invited all the big insurance companies to come listen to my pitch, like I'm pitching to an investor. So I'm like, hey, this is how, we've done our assessment. We have a roadmap. It's a 2-year roadmap. And they would like falling over each other to insure us. I'm like, no, you didn't understand. Maybe it's the accent. Like, I'm not saying we fixed it. I'm saying this is how big the problem is. They're like, oh, you're like 10 steps ahead of other municipalities. The fact that you actually know what your gaps are. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, you actually have a strategy. That's good. You're a good insured. I'm like, what? Like, maybe you don't understand me. Like, we don't have all these things. These are things we plan on having. That was a big eye-opener for me, because obviously they wanted a market share. They wanted to say we insure the city of Atlanta. So apparently 6 months after I left, the city got the insurance. Or maybe it may have been over a year. It was literally a few months before the ransomware attack. It was over a year. It was at least a year and a half after I left. Somebody finally said, oh, that thing this crazy guy was talking about, let's look into that and let's make it happen. And apparently that covered 85% of those losses. Yeah. And within 9 months, I was actually out of the country when that news broke. Talking about attribution, I was talking to a friend of mine who's one of the state agencies in Georgia. He's the CISO. I've known him for almost 20 years. And it's like, he pinged me. He's like, what did you do? I'm like, I'm no longer at the city of Atlanta. He goes, oh, they're going to blame it on you. I'm like, I've been gone for like 2 years. So I'm talking to a friend. Actually, a friend of mine pinged me like 6 months later and said, Ty, I was at a panel, and there was somebody sitting on the panel that her husband worked for the city, and they say if this former CISO hadn't left, the ransomware attack wouldn't have happened. So it's not my fault, right, that I left, to go do my own thing. So attribution, again, like people will always point fingers and say it's somebody else's fault. But how many of us are based here? Just a quick show of hands. You're based around, so you left your homes this morning, right? I assume you locked your doors, right? You closed your windows. So what if you left your doors open, wide open, and your windows wide open? Do you blame the criminal that walked into your house, or do you blame yourself? You have to take responsibility, is really what I'm saying. So going back to this thing called attribution, you could blame somebody else, but there's things we have to do to lock those doors, close those windows to make sure we're not an easy target. No pun intended. So the suspects are actually 2 Iranians. So I'm reading that, I'm like, oh, what are the chances of 2 Iranians being extradited back to the US? This was like, when did this happen? Like 2018, so over a year ago. If that happened now, I could just imagine somebody going to maybe the Iranian diplomats and say, can we have those 2 guys? They're probably going to give them the finger. Excuse my French, that's my 4th one. So a valuable lesson from history. So my wife's kind of a history buff. She always tells me that history repeats itself, especially with me. You didn't get the joke. But she always feels that there's a lot we can learn from history. The Titanic, we all know about the story. We've all probably seen the movie, somebody's still playing. I'll be out of there. Like, nobody could pay me enough for me to still be playing, while the ship is sinking. But just by a quick show of hands, we all know the story. How many actually blame, so if you're thinking about attribution, would you blame the icebergs for 1,500 lives lost? Quick show of hands, how many would blame the icebergs? Wow, 0, I'm impressed. How many would blame the captain of the ship for running into an iceberg? 4, 5? Okay, how many would blame the passengers and crew? For why? Just out of interest.
They had too much trust on the captain and on the ship. They should have accepted the risk. We live in the world of zero trust.
Wow, you're so paranoid. If you walked out City Hall, nobody would talk to you. You'd be going that way, they'd be going the other way. I thought I was paranoid, but you're like to the nth degree. But keep it up, though. We need more paranoid people in the world. Okay, so the crew. So she's blaming the passengers, but how about the crew? Would you blame the crew for not coordinating? Because they had 20 lifeboats. They actually met the compliance was 16. They went beyond, but they still didn't fill all the lifeboats. So I think it was women and children first, and then it was first class people first. So this is the beauty of flying on a plane. Like, if the plane's going to crash, that's not going to happen. Like, the people in first class are going to go first. But apparently on the Titanic, they let the rich folks who can afford the first class tickets go out first, and we ended up losing 1,500 lives. But who thinks there's something else to blame? Please. You think they were weak? Got it. Okay. So you talked about testing the so how would you test that? Like, would they physically run into an iceberg and simulate a real? How do you test that?
I'm not sure. It probably would be a very expensive process.
So back in 1912, we didn't have AI, we didn't have computers. Okay, I get it. Okay, they shouldn't have made the claim. So false advertising, right? So I like your responses because you're kind of getting closer. So the reason why so many lives were lost, this may shock some people, like the communication system was bad. So they actually didn't call for help quickly enough. It took less than 3 hours for the ship to sink. So apparently a lot of the maritime rules changed around communications due to that incident. So somebody mentioned having an incident response plan. Part of your incident response plan is how you communicate when there's a disaster. Communicating out, communicating to folks you're going to work with. Don't you see parallels between that and what we're experiencing in cyberspace? I love to use this when I'm teaching my 5-day class because it really, really makes us realize there's so many things that happens in the physical world that is happening in cyber, and we're making the same mistakes over and over again. So make sure in your incident response plan, you think about worst case scenario like AVA and like I'd like to do, and people pay me big bucks just to talk about worst case scenario. You know, sometimes I just like, even I don't believe the worst case scenario, but I still use it. You have to be able to think that way. But very good engagement. So one of the approaches I always take, whether it's as a CISO, as a consultant, I do a lot of virtual CISO consulting now for small, medium-sized businesses. I do an assessment across people, process, data, technology. I think that's a really good blueprint to follow. I don't think there's anything security, whether it's ISO, NIST, even the OWASP, checklist that you wouldn't find in these 4 areas. So I would highly recommend you kind of take that holistic approach to cybersecurity. And these slides will be available through Harald. So, happy to, beg, borrow, and steal from that. AppSecCali is kind enough to pay for my flight and my hotel, but I still have to pay for my own meals. And because I'm cheap, I let my nonprofit pay for it. So I have to give them a quick plug. It's the Holistic Information Security Practitioner Institute. I founded the institute. Doug McCabe has been a very loyal member for about 12 years. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be on the stage. So shout out to Doug, and for Richard and Harald for putting up with me as well. So we're 501c3. We have over 1,000 members, mostly security directors, leaders, mostly in the southeast of the US. But we actually have a fairly good following in California, like the LA County CISO. He's been through the program. He's trained about 100 people when he was at King County. So that's my shameless plug for HISPI. We kind of take a holistic approach. We look at all the different layers of governance. So it's really more of like a GRC type training, but with a very strong focus on cybersecurity. So this is my gift to you. So I just launched a book called Attribution. It's on Kindle. It's also paperback through Amazon. It's actually not a textbook. Like, I hate to write textbook. I hate reading. I can understand why some people never read, like people in the White House. That was cheeky, sorry, and cheesy.
Fix that soon.
Right. So Attribution, I promise not to get into politics, so I apologize publicly for that. Attribution is a fictional novella. It's not a textbook, but it's real life. The ghostwriter actually has a brother. Amanda Holloman is my ghostwriter, so shout out to her. She's a PhD student at University of Alabama, and she's African American. I don't know if you know anything about Alabama, but so I always say she's got tough skin. And she wrote the book with so much passion, with so much heart, because the character in the book resembles her brother. Her brother has got Asperger's syndrome, and he's now on his way to join the military. But she was able to really write this from the heart because it's so close to home. The story so close to home for her. So that's the QR code if you'd like to get it. I'm also giving away 30 copies during the raffle at 4. Sorry, you just bought one? Oh, man. I should have talked faster, I'm sorry. So I'm listening to Alex, Stamos, and Eva, and I'm like, I don't talk this fast. Like, how am I gonna? I'm sorry, but your contribution is very, very well appreciated, sir. But that's kind of my gift to you. I think this potentially could end up becoming a movie. Kind of what I envision is for it to become a movie. The book starts on January 4. We saw the drone strike in the Middle East on January 3, a day before. The drone strike was actually a hacked drone. So I'm not going to give away too much, but I think it's worth a read. Well, I don't know if we still have time for one or two questions. I'll give you the first, right.
Very entertaining and engaging talk. My cheeks are still hurting.
I'm a jester, Thank you.
So you're really fortunate to have such a great wife, but really, how did you sleep?
Right, that's good. Okay, that's a really good question. So I didn't sleep too well last night. So the reason why I didn't sleep too well is I'm presenting to a bunch of hackers and hacker wannabes, and I haven't fully patched one of my systems. I mean, that's just like, I'm that guy now, like, that does the stuff that is just like stupid, because I become more of a business guy. And I know that's kind of a long-winded way of answering that. I sleep knowing that I've done the best I can. Like, if I haven't done the best I can't sleep.
Nice answer. I have one more technical question. Sure. So you talked a lot about breaches, and yes, we all know anything can be the weakest link in our security program model, technical controls. Mm-hmm. What are your views on microsegmentation, which is actually responsible for minimizing the impact of breach?
I would highly recommend it. I think I'm not a technical expert anymore. I used to be back in my super, but we're talking segmentation, basically, whether it's micro or any other type. I think it makes sense. Like, put your crown, you can't protect everything. So you got to protect where your crown jewels are. So I used to help like like I helped the Georgia State actually get their ISO certificate. And I remember having a conversation with the CISO, who's now the CISO CIO at the University of Tampa. And I said, you know, you need to protect against the bad actors. And it's like, Ty, you don't get it. I have 40,000 potential bad actors behind my firewall. I'm trying to protect the world from them. So what do? They segmented their data, PCI data, PHI, into a data center, and they completely kept it separate from the entire network. So I'm all for it. It makes perfect sense. It just makes sure that you're not overspending, because you could overspend on controls. So you want to spend money on protect your most critical assets and keep them off from everything else. So yes, I'm for it. Long-winded way of saying yes, I agree. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you said that you had one. So thanks for the talk. You said you had one engineer that was working under you.
Yes.
So obviously not a huge amount of direct reports that could support you. So how did you utilize other groups or leverage prior experience and knowledge throughout the organization to build a strategy?
Very good question. So my one engineer, he actually became the CISO after I left. I kind of groomed him because I knew I wasn't going to hang around for too long. To groom him to become my successor. They didn't give him the role until they couldn't find a replacement. They were looking for somebody like me. I'm like, you're not going to get somebody who wants to take that pay cut. But what I did is I did a training class. I did my HISP training for about 20 people in IT and some outside of IT. So I had an information security governance group that I chaired, and then the Deputy Chief of Police was the co-chair. So I needed somebody with a gun, basically, because I don't carry guns. Because apparently in Georgia, people listen to you when you carry a gun, especially if you got a badge. So I leveraged other people that I knew could have influence and people would listen to. So it wasn't just about this guy, Taiye Lambo, saying, you know, you got to do these things that people didn't think had to be done. But eventually I grew the team to 6 direct reports, including 3 interns before I left. Yeah. So I influenced people. I gave them the knowledge and I gave them the education, and they became kind of my advocates, including folks in the mayor's office. Okay. All right. Well, I'm still going to be around till 4, so please feel free to, you know, talk to me, exchange cards. But thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.